Olives hills and first settlements. From prehistoric caves to early Bronze Age cities, you arrive before the arguments begin. Hey guys, tonight we journey way back to a place where time moves like sand drifting across stone. You're standing on a ridge above a sun-baked valley olive trees, twisting their silver-green leaves in the breeze, and tiny streams carving slow, patient lines through dust that's seen more footsteps than you can count. The sun's low golden, and you can just make out the outline of distant hilltop ruins, half swallowed by time and wildflowers. It's quiet, so quiet, you can hear your own breath, and maybe the ghosts of people who once argued over goats and grain, right where you're standing. You've arrived in what will one day be called Israel and Palestine. But for now it's just land, untamed, unnamed, and oh so ready for people to fight over it. And spoiler alert, they will. A lot. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're somewhere around 10,000 BCE, and honestly, it smells like wet sheep and charcoal. Humans here are learning how to stay in one place. That's a big deal. Before this, they were mostly wandering, following rivers and herds and seasonal nuts like prehistoric foodies. But now they're digging into the ground. Literally. You wander past a cluster of pit dwellings, simple huts sunk into the earth, ringed with stones and smoke-blackened ceilings. These early communities spring up around springs and fertile patches, places like Jericho, which by around 9000 BCE has become something of a prehistoric superstar. Stone towers, walls, and maybe even an early version of neighborhood gossip. Historians still argue whether Jericho was built for defense or just really into stonework. Either way, it's a city before cities were cool. As you shuffle down a dusty slope into the valley, you notice something strange. Things here feel oddly familiar. There's barley and wheat in baskets made of reeds, goats with bells around their necks, and children throwing pebbles at each other with universal glee. The land is gentle in places, sharp in others. Hilltops give way to wadi's dry riverbeds that flood when they feel like it. And the Mediterranean is close enough to send breezes that taste faintly of salt and pine. The people call themselves many things, none of which will survive in your history textbooks, but we call them Natufians, Gasulians, or just those early folks with great obsidian tools. They trade, they bury their dead with seashells and ochre, and they paint things on cave walls that we still don't fully understand. One scholar suggested some markings might be part of a lunar calendar. Another said they might just be doodles. So, pick your team. By the Bronze Age, around 300 BCE, everything gets shinier and tenser. Copper tools show up along with donkeys that are frankly overworked. You pass caravans laden with amphorae of oil and jugs of fermented date juice. The region's becoming a crossroads. Egypt looms to the southwest. Mesopotamia whispers from the east and up north. Hittites are hammering out their own ambitions. Settlements evolve into fortified towns. Picture mud brick walls, watchtowers, granaries. You walk through Hazor or maybe Megiddo names that will show up in both biblical scrolls and military strategy seminars. There are marketplaces now, and someone's always haggling over fish. You pass scribes etching symbols into clay tablets using styluses made from sharpened reeds. Bureaucracy is born, and humanity collectively sighs. One quirky fact. Some early homes in this region are built with one entrance on the roof. To visit a neighbor, you literally climb up a ladder and pop in through the ceiling like an ancient Santa Claus. It's unclear if this was for ventilation or just to mess with visitors. But even in this era of slow, deliberate progress, conflict simmers. Resources are limited. Water especially becomes sacred and disputed. And there's another rising tension: identity. Who belongs here? Who gets to claim this spring or that hilltop? These are questions that will echo louder and louder for thousands of years. You trail your fingers along a crumbling wall painted with faded handprints. Somewhere nearby, a shepherd whistles a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. The sun dips lower. There's dinner being prepared, Lentils, maybe wild onions, definitely some unleavened something, and the smell drifts up through the valley like a sigh. You sit, you breathe, you feel the land settle into its first uneasy rest, like it knows it won't last long. And just before your eyes close for a moment, you hear it not fighting, not yet, just the soft, endless whisper of a place, remembering all its beginnings. Canaanites, clans, and early kingdoms, nomads' walled towns, and the slow stirrings of identity. By the time you stretch awake under a rising Bronze Age sun, things have complicated. The valley you walked through in the last section, it's now a chessboard for kings, warlords, and diplomats with excellent eyeliner. We're in the 2nd millennium BCE, and the political landscape of this region is like trying to organize family seating at a wedding. Everyone's related somehow, nobody's happy, and someone's always about to throw wine. You wander through Canaan. Yes, that Canaan, which isn't so much a unified kingdom as a loose confederation of city-states, doing their best to survive between two geopolitical giants, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Imagine being the cheese in a very ancient sandwich. Egypt controls much of the region now. Pharaohs send governors, scribes, and those famous chariots with wheels so thin they make your ankles hurt just thinking about them. But local kings aren't always loyal. They write long clay letters back to Egypt, complaining about neighbors stealing goats' towns, defecting, or the ever-problematic Apiru people who may or may not be social outcasts, raiders, or Proto-Hebrews, depending on which scholar you ask. Historians still argue whether the term Apiru refers to an ethnic group or just anyone who skipped paying taxes. You walk into a city like Lachish. Its gate is guarded, the market's lively, and there's definitely someone yelling at a potter for overcharging on amphory. Priests in linen robes tend small altars, and children carry offerings of fruit. In the background, a scribe hunched over a tablet muttering about his ink drying too fast. It's a living world, dusty, noisy, full of tiny moments that somehow survive in shards of pottery and papyrus fragments. Religion, meanwhile, is wild. Every city has its own gods, but everyone's hedging their bets. You light a candle to Baal, offer grain to Asherah, and still mumble something under your breath just in case El is listening. There's no Google calendar of sacred days, just overlapping rituals, fertility festivals, and mysterious stone pillars pointing at stars you can't even name. And honestly, some of these religious statues look more like abstract art than divine figures. One had the body of a woman and the head of maybe a turnip. But wait, here come the Egyptians again. Thutmose III and Ramses II with their armies, scribes, and divine claims. They carve giant inscriptions into walls announcing victories over Canaanite rebels, though you notice those same rebels seem to bounce back every few years. It's less we conquered, and more we strongly discouraged dissent temporarily. You pass through the coastal city of Gaza, already a critical hub. Traders hawk incense and lapis lazuli, their donkeys braying in protest under heavy loads. It's here on these sunburned trade routes that ideas move as fast as goods. Languages mix. Babylonian myths blend with Egyptian theology, and someone somewhere is probably retelling a flood story involving a fish that sings. It's all wonderfully chaotic. And in the background of this hustle, rumblings. Among nomadic groups in the hill country, oral traditions begin to form. Stories of ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, pass from campfire to campfire. A people begins to define itself not by cities, but by covenant. A pact with a singular God unseen, but increasingly vocal. You walk through a dry wadi and hear a shepherd whisper a story of exodus and promise of land and law. It's not written yet, not in this century, but the roots are there. Here's something curious. Recent archaeology has found evidence that many of the Israelite settlements in the highlands didn't emerge from foreign invasions, but from within the local Canaanite population. That suggests the early Israelites were local dissidents, land reformers, budget-conscious farmers tired of palace taxes. No one agrees. But the idea that identity can form from a split, not an arrival, will come back again and again. And then change. Around 1200 BCE, the entire eastern Mediterranean falls into chaos. We call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, but really, it's a multi-regional freakout. Empires shrink cities, burn trade routes, shatter. Sea peoples arrive, whom no one really understands. Historians still argue whether they were invaders, migrants, or just really well-armed tourists with a dislike for bureaucracy. In the aftermath, the Canaanite city-states weaken. New groups rise. Among them, the Philistines, possibly related to those mysterious sea peoples who settle along the coastal plains in fortified cities like Ashkelon and Ekron. You spot one through morning mist, its stone walls dotted with watchtowers, its harbour brimming with ships. These folks know fashion-striped robes, elaborate jewellery and pottery, so distinct it gets its own museum exhibit centuries later. And then there are the Israelites, increasingly present in the rugged hill country. Their settlements are humble stone foundations, silos, simple shrines. No fancy idols, just stone altars, and maybe a leftover Egyptian scarab or two. They're building identity from the ground up, quite literally. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across terraced hills, you watch smoke curl from village fires. There's peace for now, uneasy, fragile, but real. For a brief moment, the region is a patchwork of peoples, each tending their own fields and myths, not yet clashing in full force. You sit by a fig tree, pluck a ripe fruit, and let the juice run down your fingers. The past is sticky sweet, and not nearly as simple as anyone will tell you. Kingdoms of scroll and sword. You wander through the rise of Israel and Judah monarchies with fragile crowns. You wake the next morning to the clang of metal on stone and the low hum of chanting. The Iron Age has arrived, and it's not subtle. The air smells of charcoal and ambition. The tribes that once wandered these hills have settled, and now they want walls, thrones, and a decent name in the history books. You find yourself in a landscape where two groups are staring each other down across valleys and coastlines, the Israelites and the Philistines. It's the original neighbor feud, long before lawnmower noise and parking disputes. This one involves iron weapons, stolen livestock, and a few giants. Yes, giants. You duck into the crowd, watching two armies line up in a valley. One side wears patchwork tunics, waves bronze-tipped spears, and chants prayers to Yahweh. The other side marches in sharp formation, their helmets gleaming, their champions confident. And then, thump out steps Goliath. He's big, loud, and carrying way too much armor for desert heat. A shepherd boy steps forward, flings a stone, and suddenly you've got a national myth. Scholars still argue whether David was a real person or a composite of several warlords, but either way, that slingshot moment iconic. Israel in the meantime is evolving. From loose tribal confederations, they shift toward kingship. First Saul, then David, then Solomon. You walk into Jerusalem now more than a hilltop town. Under Solomon, it's a capital. There's building taxing, maybe a little forced labor. You pass under cedar beams imported from Lebanon, admire a temple rumored to hold the presence of God, and wonder how many goats it took to fund all this. Solomon's temple becomes a focal point, not just of worship, but of political identity. A single sanctuary in one city for one people. It's a bold move. Most ancient religions prefer multiple shrines scattered across regions, but here the centralization is part of the point. And as you sip date wine from a clay cup, a scribe beside you leans in and mutters, "This will end badly." You believe him, because after Solomon's death, things crack. The kingdom splits Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Two kings, two capitals, same God, different priorities. You hike between Samaria and Jerusalem and hear different accents, see different royal robes. Religious tensions bubble too. The northern kingdom builds its own shrines at Bethel and Dan, prompting priests in Jerusalem to side-eye them with holy suspicion. Meanwhile, the region's surrounded by bigger predators. Egypt still lingers to the southwest. Assyria starts stretching its claws from the northeast. You walk into a village and see children whisper about the Ninevites whose soldiers wear terrifying beards and speak in hissing syllables. You don't stay long. Eventually, Assyria swoops in. In 722 BCE, the northern kingdom of Israel is crushed. Its elites deported, its cities sacked. You pass abandoned vineyards and overgrown wells. The 10 tribes of Israel lost, scattered. Historians still argue whether they assimilated, migrated, or were absorbed into other populations. Some say they turned up in India or Ethiopia. Others just shrug. The South Judah hangs on. Barely. Its kings play diplomatic chess sometimes with Egypt, sometimes with Babylon. It's like watching someone date 2 exes at once, and you know it's going to implode. Meanwhile, prophets rise. Not robe-wearing fortune-tellers, but passionate street preachers warning of doom and urging moral reform. You pass Isaiah in one alley ranting about justice and foreign alliances, and Jeremiah in another weeping near the city gates. They're poetic, dramatic, and wildly unpopular with the royal court. Honestly, they'd kill on TikTok. Then Babylon arrives. Nebuchadnezzar II isn't messing around. In 586 BCE, Jerusalem falls. The temple is torched. Priests are slaughtered, nobles are exiled, and the city is left in ruins. You sit among the ashes and hear the stunned silence of a people whose entire worldview just crumbled. A god tied to one place, what now? And yet something extraordinary happens. In exile, a new kind of identity emerges. Away from their land and temple, the Jewish people begin to define themselves through texts, traditions, and memory. It's a psychological pivot, one that allows survival without sovereignty. As one elder whispers to you in Babylon, "We carry our home in our scrolls now." That line stays with you. Meanwhile, Babylon becomes a mixed bag. It's multicultural, yes, but also oppressive. Some exiles find work status, even comfort. Others dream only of return. The Psalms speak of weeping by the rivers of Babylon, refusing to sing songs of Zion in a foreign land. It's the world's oldest recorded homesickness. Then another shift. Persia rises. Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon in 539 BCE and offers exiles a chance to go home. You watch families pack carts, kiss friends goodbye, and set out for a Jerusalem they haven't seen in decades. Some choose to stay, others go. Historians still argue whether the returnees were welcomed or resented by those who had remained. Human dynamics, it turns out, change less than the empires around them. When you finally stand again in Jerusalem, the temple is being rebuilt, slowly, under Persian oversight. The city is a construction site of hope, bureaucracy, and second chances. The priest Ezra reads from ancient scrolls while builders shout over stone deliveries. You breathe dust and dream. It's a brief calm before the next storm. Babylon and the first big exile. Empires shuffle borders and deport locals, leaving memories that never really heal. The dust still clings to your robes as you step back into a half-built Jerusalem. The Second Temple stands smaller, plainer, but echoing with determination. You linger near its courtyard and watch people file in their heads, bowed sandals, scraping stone. This is a community rebuilding not just walls, but identity. The trauma of exile is fresh, but so is the idea that survival isn't just possible, it's sacred. You wander through scroll-filled houses and half-tiled streets. The people are no longer merely residents of Judah. They're Jews now, an identity forged in diaspora and stitched together with memory, ritual, and resilience. You smell leavenless bread during Passover, hear the soft rustle of Torah parchment being unrolled, and realize this city, fragile as it looks, is a stubborn one. Then Persia steps aside gently. In comes a new player with shinier armor and better cheekbones, Alexander the Great. He sweeps through the region like a whirlwind in a toga, conquering everything with startling speed. When he arrives in the Levant, there's less resistance than you'd expect, mainly because everyone's exhausted and slightly impressed. Under Alexander and his successors, Greek culture spreads like hummus on warm flatbread. You stroll through Hellenistic marketplaces where scrolls of Plato sit beside kosher butchers. It's weird. You overhear rabbis debating in Greek and youths practicing wrestling moves that raise rabbinical eyebrows. Greek influence is everywhere: architecture, language, even coinage. Historians still argue whether this period was cultural enlightenment or slow erosion. Then comes the Seleucid Empire, particularly one overachiever, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He's got big ideas, like banning circumcision, sacrificing pigs in the temple, and renaming cities after himself. Spoiler, none of this goes over well. You feel the tension crackle. Then one day in a hill town, a priest named Mattathias snaps. The Maccabean revolt explodes. You crouch behind a low stone wall as guerrilla fighters ambush a Seleucid garrison. It's muddy, desperate, and fierce. Think Die Hard, but with menorahs. The rebels, led by Judah Maccabee, whose name literally means "the hammer strike back, reclaim Jerusalem, and purify the temple." Oil miraculously lasts 8 days. Someone starts writing songs about it. Hanukkah is born. With the Seleucids weakening and the Maccabees establishing their own rule, the Hasmonean dynasty, you'd think there'd be peace. But nope. The new Jewish rulers start acting a little Seleucidish. They expand territory, dabble in corruption, and make deals with rising powers. Like Rome. You sip watered wine beside a dusty merchant caravan when the Roman legions appear on the horizon. They march in formation, red-crested helmets, catching the light like moving poppies. Their arrival isn't a full invasion yet, but an invitation to become a client kingdom. It's like being a friend of the empire, with benefits and strings. Judea accepts, for a while, but resentment builds. You hear whispers in dark alleys and temple courtyards. Foreign coins in the temple. Roman standards too close to holy sites. It feels like storm clouds rolling over a fragile field. Then Rome appoints a local ruler, Herod the Great. Technically Jewish, politically savvy, and incredibly paranoid. You walk through his palaces, one carved into a mountain, another floating near the Dead Sea. They're architectural marvels and emotional overcompensations. Herod expands the Second Temple to grandeur beyond belief, but also executes several family members. You keep your head down. Still, Jerusalem under Herod gleams. Visitors marvel, the economy grows. Yet beneath the marble, tensions boil. Roman governors get greedier. Taxes go up. Dignity goes down. Zealots, militant nationalists start murmuring about uprising. You pass graffiti on a stone wall. No king but God. It's crude but bold. Meanwhile, outside Jerusalem, in sleepy Galilean towns, people talk about a carpenter's son named Jesus. He preaches peace, but also warns of coming change. Some call him Messiah. Others call him trouble. You follow a crowd into the city as he arrives on a donkey greeted with palm branches. A week later, he's crucified under Roman orders. Whether you believe in his divinity or not, his followers, small at first, begin spreading his teachings like wildfire. Rome notices, and it doesn't like flames. Soon, rebellion breaks out for real. The First Jewish-Roman War begins in 66 CE. You find yourself dodging arrows and slipping through alleys as revolutionaries fight Roman legions. At first, the Jewish rebels make gains, but Rome doesn't lose easily. In 70 CE, Roman general and future emperor Titus lays siege to Jerusalem. The city starves, the temple burns, the air fills with ash and grief. You weep beside locals, watching sacred stones collapse. The Second Temple, heart of Jewish worship, is gone. Again. What's left? A wall. One you may still see tourists touch with reverence. A people once centered on a place must now pivot again to memory text and scattered communities. Synagogues replace altars. Torah study replaces sacrifice. Survival shifts, adapts, perseveres. Some rebels hold out in desert fortresses like Masada, where according to tradition, they choose death over surrender. Whether this mass suicide happened exactly as described is debated. Historians still argue whether it was fact or national myth. But the symbolism remains sharp. As you drift into quieter towns, you see diaspora beginning. Jews scatter to Alexandria, Babylon, Rome, and beyond. Gaza too sees waves of Jewish, Greek, and later Christian presence. It becomes a hinge point, a crossroads for empire faith and occasional sea breezes. The stage is now set for new powers to enter. The Romans rule, but the seeds of another great shift, Islam, begin to stir in the distant sands. Persians, temples, and quiet resets. You watch rebuilding begin under new rulers, with old grudges intact. You rise early dusk clinging to your skin, just in time to catch the scent of something entirely new drifting from the east whispers of a prophet in the Hejaz. It's the 7th century now, and Arabia is no longer just a place for traders and storytellers. It's about to become the heartbeat of a new world faith. In Mecca, you wander the tight sun-baked alleys as a man named Muhammad preaches in hushed but insistent tones. He talks of one God, justice, mercy, and submission. You see how crowds gather and grow while others scoff or throw stones. His words feel like the beginning of a long echo, one you sense will reach every corner of the known world. The rise of Islam is swift and stunning. You blink and the Arabian Peninsula is unified. Blink again and Muslim armies ride north into Byzantine and Sasanian lands, those old empires collapsing like tired tents. By 637, Jerusalem falls to Caliph Umar. But gently, there's no mass bloodshed, just a quiet handover and an agreement to protect Christian and Jewish holy sites. You tread the city's stone paths under his rule and feel oddly a sense of religious coexistence hanging in the air. This era is calm, a lullaby of architecture scholarship and interfaith markets. You hear Hebrew chants, Greek philosophy, and Arabic call to prayer swirling together like music. Gaza becomes a sleepy trade hub again, a place where olive oil fabric and ideas flow freely. But you know it won't last. Soon disagreements over who should lead the Muslim world crack the unity like a dropped amphora. The Sunni-Shia split is born. It's not just theological, it's familial, emotional, and increasingly political. You sit through tense dinner conversations where someone mentions Ali and suddenly no one touches their hummus. Back in Jerusalem, you stand inside the newly built Dome of the Rock. It glows with gold and geometric beauty, perched like a jewel on the Temple Mount now called Haram al-Sharif. This is where Muhammad is believed to have ascended into heaven. It's also where Jewish temples once stood. Layers of holiness stack here like awkward bunk beds. You wander through the Umayyad and Abbasid periods, watching empires shuffle capitals from Damascus to Baghdad. The region changes hands, but not character. It remains diverse, intense, and way too important for its own good. The Abbasids lose grip, and the Fatimids roll in from Egypt. Then the Seljuks, those Central Asian adventurers, with sharp swords and sharper cheekbones. Jerusalem flips again. The people get used to it. Flags change, but the olives still grow. The prayers still rise. And then, out of Europe's cold northern fog come the Crusaders. They arrive wearing chainmail and carrying crosses the size of oars. You cringe as Jerusalem is taken in 1099 with fire and fury. Blood is said to run in the streets, though as always, historians still argue whether it was ankle-deep or merely dramatic poetry. Now you see mosques turned into churches and minarets silenced. Gaza falls to Crusader hands too, its port bristling with European ships and imported wine. Locals tolerate, resist, or flee. Some try to do all three at once, but history loves a counterpunch. A century later, Saladin sweeps in graceful, disciplined, and quietly devastating. In 1187, he retakes Jerusalem. The city is spared the massacre this time. You walk behind his troops, marveling at their restraint. Muslim control returns, but Saladin allows Christians to leave in peace. Some even stay. It's an oddly civil exodus. Still, crusades keep coming like bad sequels. You pass through Gaza as it's fortified and refortified. Towers crumble, walls rebuild, merchants reopen shop like nothing happened. You sip sour pomegranate juice and wonder how anyone keeps track of who rules what. By the 13th century, things get even weirder. Mongols storm in from the east, smashing Baghdad. Mamluks rise in Egypt, former slaves turned sultans. They seize control of Jerusalem and Gaza, stabilizing the region sort of. You visit schools teaching law medicine and Quranic recitation. It's calm again for now. But under the calm lies a quiet exhaustion. The region is sacred, yes, but also a crossroads, a prize, a burden. Everyone wants it. Few can hold it. As you meander through Ottoman bazaars and half-buried Crusader ruins, you begin to understand this isn't just a conflict zone, it's a memory zone. Every stone has a story, and every story has at least three sides. In Gaza now, a provincial town under Ottoman rule, you find Sufis dancing under the stars, fishermen mending nets, and poets writing verses about the moon. The town is no longer the violent pivot of war, but a sleepy edge of empire. You sigh. Finally, a break. Greeks' gymnasiums and a bit of rebellion. Hellenism arrives, and so do cultural clashes toga style. You nap under a fig tree in the early 1500s. Ottoman drums thudding somewhere in the distance, the empire now stretching its mighty limbs over the Holy Land. When you wake, the flag has changed again, but this time the rulers seem surprisingly consistent. You trudge through Jerusalem's stone markets, now lined with Ottoman lanterns and coffee sellers with copper kettles. The Ottomans bring bureaucracy, a lot of it. Taxes are tallied on scrolls as long as your arm, and every village is catalogued like a recipe. Gaza, nestled by the Mediterranean, becomes a sanjak, an administrative district mildly important, mostly coastal and often ignored unless someone's late on payments. But don't be fooled. Just because the Ottomans are organized doesn't mean they're boring. The region under their rule is full of life mosques, bloom churches quietly persist, and Jewish communities find relative peace. You even catch a whiff of garlic-fried hummus wafting from a window somewhere in Hebron. The food alone might justify the taxes. In Jerusalem, you witness Suleiman the Magnificent rebuild the city walls in the 1530s. They're still standing today, by the way, which is more than we can say for most 16th century marriages. Suleiman also renovates the Dome of the Rock, adds fountains, and makes the city feel polished, gilded even. But of course, the calm isn't perfect. There are peasant revolts, jealous governors, and those awkward moments when local leaders get too ambitious. Still, compared to the roller coaster of crusades, this is a historical hammock. You swing gently in it, lulled by Ottoman lullabies and the rhythm of call to prayer. Meanwhile, in Europe, something strange is brewing. Colonialism, nationalism, enlightenment, and worst of all, maps. Europeans begin drawing lines on paper and calling them borders, like that's going to work in a region where people trade across mountains and marry across languages. By the 1800s, the Ottomans are wobbling. The empire's known as the sick man of Europe, which if you ask us is pretty rude. Still, you feel it, the infrastructure phrase officials grow corrupt, and the British and French keep poking around like nosy neighbours with fancy hats. In Gaza, you notice things changing. European consuls pop up. Steamships drop anchor. Bible scholars arrive with sand in their boots, and long arguments about where exactly this or that event from the Book of Judges happened. Honestly, no one agrees. Historians still argue whether Gaza was ever truly a backwater or just cleverly understated. Then comes the 19th century's cruelest magic trick, nationalism. See, before this, people mostly identified by religion, language, or village. Now new labels arrive: Arab, Turk, Jew, Palestinian, Zionist. These identities are powerful, enriching, and dividing. You sit in a Jerusalem cafe and overhear a heated debate about whose history counts more. The coffee's still good, but the tension crackles like firewood. As the Ottoman Empire fades into the sunset like an exhausted actor, World War I kicks open the doors to chaos. You stand on a ridge outside Beersheba in 1917, watching British forces, led by generals in khaki shorts, defeat Ottoman cavalry. A strange sight, isn't it? Horses charging into machine guns, all for control of land, already promised to multiple groups at once. Let's count the British promised the French some of it in the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement. They promised the Arabs an independent homeland if they revolt against the Ottomans, and they promised the Jews a national home in Palestine via the 1917 Balfour Declaration. You don't need a PhD to see this will end poorly. By 1920, the Ottoman curtain falls. Britain takes over Palestine under a League of Nations mandate, like a teacher forced to supervise a class no one wants. You stroll through Gaza's dusty streets now lined with British signs and policemen with awkward moustaches. It feels like a strange play. The actors are local, but the script is foreign. Under British rule, Jewish immigration increases, fueled by Zionist aspirations and European anti-Semitism. Palestinian Arabs grow uneasy. Tensions spike. You hear chants, see fists raised, and feel the sense that two dreams, each deeply rooted, are heading toward collision. Still, there are moments of peace, joint labor unions, mixed cafes, Arabic and Hebrew newspapers trading barbs and poetry. But the balance is delicate, like balancing a pomegranate on a sword's tip. In the 1930s, it tips. The Arab Revolt erupts in 1936. You dodge strikes, curfews, and raids. British soldiers patrol narrow alleys. The revolt is both a cry for independence and a warning against Jewish statehood. It lasts 3 years. By the end, hundreds are dead, and Britain tightens its grip while quietly realizing it's lost control. You sit beside a market stall as locals whisper about what's next. Some want peace. Others want justice. Many want both, but don't agree on how to get there. And then, like a thunderclap far away, comes the Holocaust. 6 million Jews perish in Europe's death camps. You can't sleep after that section of the news. It shifts everything. It amplifies the urgency of Zionist dreams. It pushes more survivors toward Palestine, now desperate for a home that won't burn down. Meanwhile, Palestinian Arabs feel increasingly displaced, cornered in their own story. You walk through Jaffa in 1947 and hear gunfire crackle between militias. It's not just politics anymore, it's survival. The British. They quietly pack their bags. They'll leave in 1948. You know what's coming. Romans and revolt. After revolt, an empire gets fed up with constant resistance and redraws everything. You stand at the edge of May 1948, your sandals scraping dry stone as the British lower their flag for the last time. There's no grand speech, no teary farewell, just a steamer, trunk, a flickering street lamp, and a colonial shrug. The British mandate in Palestine ends, and with it, the illusion of anyone truly managing this land. You barely blink before David Ben-Gurion declares the birth of the State of Israel. Fireworks don't mark the moment cannon fire does. As the radio crackles, the announcement, 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, mobilize. The ink on the map isn't dry before it's soaked in conflict. This is the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, or as Palestinians call it, the Nakba, the catastrophe. You peer through smoke and dust. As militias become armies, neighborhoods become front lines, and hope becomes a border drawn with trembling hands. Over 700,000 Palestinians are displaced, their villages either emptied or erased. Some leave with the keys to their homes still jingling in their pockets, expecting to return in a few days. Most never do. Historians still argue whether those expulsions were a tragic byproduct of war or part of a deliberate strategy. Either way, you can't help but feel the sorrow hanging in the air like incense too thick to breathe. Israel survives the war, expands its territory beyond the UN's original partition plan, and is now a reality. Gaza, once a sleepy coastal town with orange groves and fishermen's nets, becomes something else entirely. Egypt takes control, and the Strip turns into a dense patchwork of tents and trauma as waves of Palestinian refugees settle into a narrow space with shrinking options. You try to sleep one night in a canvas tent just outside Rafah. The wind cuts through, children cry. Elders speak in hushed tones of a village lost. One man sharpens a knife not for war, but to peel fruit, something normal, something human. Meanwhile, in Israel, the mood is euphoric and anxious. A state has risen from ashes, but it's surrounded by hostility. You sit at a Tel Aviv cafe and hear a heated conversation. Can we be both Jewish and democratic, safe and fair, armed and at peace? No one agrees, but the coffee's still excellent. The next decades bring no calm. In 1956, the Suez Crisis erupts. You stand on a rooftop in Gaza and spot Israeli, French, and British forces advancing all in a tangled dance of Cold War chess. Egypt's Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal, and suddenly the world's eyes are back on this narrow corridor of desert and defiance. The invasion is brief, and under international pressure, the invaders withdraw, but the taste of imperial leftovers lingers. By 1967, tensions are thick as molasses. You hear the war drums again. This time it's the 6-day war. Israel, in a stunning blitz, captures the West Bank, Golan Heights, Sinai Peninsula, and yes, the Gaza Strip. You stand dazed in a field of broken tanks and wonder how 6 days can undo decades. Israel now occupies Gaza, and things change fast. There are settlements, communities built by Israelis, often on lands Palestinians see as stolen. There are military checkpoints, barbed wire fences, ID cards, curfews. You feel it, an invisible tension in every alley, every checkpoint beep. Still, life goes on. You see boys flying kites above crumbling rooftops, women gossiping over cumin-scented tea. A couple argues over wedding expenses while a military patrol passes. Resilience is a kind of protest too, but pressure builds. By the late 1980s, it bursts open. The first Intifada begins in 1987. Stones versus rifles, graffiti as defiance. You watch a child throw a rock across a narrow street and vanish into smoke. The uprising is grassroots, angry, messy, and impossible to ignore. Hamas is founded around this time, a new actor on the stage, blending religious fervor with resistance. Historians still debate whether the uprising forced Israel to negotiate or hardened both sides into deeper trenches. But you know this blood and memory stick harder than dust. The 1990s bring the Oslo Accords, handshakes on White House lawns, hope briefly. You spot Rabin and Arafat in suits, two weary men smiling for cameras, their eyes doing all the real talking. You sit on a plastic chair in Gaza and hear mixed reactions. Some cheer, some roll their eyes, some just want water that runs every day. Gaza is now governed in part by the Palestinian Authority. The dream is a two-state solution, like a couple in counselling trying to divide a one-bedroom apartment. But spoilers abound. Rabin is assassinated. Extremists grow bolder. Settlements expand. Trust erodes like sandstone in the rain. Then comes 2005. Israel unilaterally withdraws from Gaza. Soldiers evacuate settlers. You watch bulldozers demolish homes so no one else can claim them. Some celebrate, others warn. This isn't peace, just reconfiguration. They're not wrong. Hamas soon wins elections in Gaza. The world blinks. Aid is frozen. Factions clash. By 2007, Hamas controls Gaza entirely. The Strip becomes sealed off by Israel, by Egypt, by politics, by fear. You peer over a concrete wall topped with razor wire. Beyond it, 2 million people live in 140 square miles. It's a cage with Wi-Fi, a place where drone buzzes are lullabies and power cuts are routine. Fish can't swim out to sea. Farmers can't till too close to fences. The air hangs thick with longing. Still, weddings happen. Poetry is written. Kids sneak off to swim. Life refuses to give up. But you feel it, this story isn't over. And the next flare is just a breath away. Byzantines, pilgrims, and desert monks. As the Roman world shifts Christian, so do sacred tensions. You stand in Gaza early summer, the kind of heavy heat that sticks to your skin like wet parchment. There's no breeze, only the hum of generators and the distant thump of something you don't want to identify. You breathe it in anyway, salt from the sea diesel fumes, and the unshakable scent of dust warmed by tension. Since Hamas took control in 2007, Gaza has been both fortress and fishbowl. Israel and Egypt maintain a blockade that limits goods movement and opportunity. Cement is rationed, electricity is fickle, and the sea is monitored like a secret diary. If you want to build a future, you'll need permits, luck, and probably a backup generator. Inside, Gaza Hamas sets the tone. Militants in olive uniforms patrol streets that zigzag through overpopulated refugee camps. The group is rooted in political Islam and resistance, but also provides schools, clinics, and sometimes garbage pickup, because even ideologies need plumbing. Outside Gaza, Israel watches everything. Drones hover, satellites blink. There's no border fence, as much as there's a techno-wall, sensors, cameras, automated turrets. One Israeli soldier refers to Gaza as a neighborhood under constant surveillance, just not one we visit. You walk alongside a Palestinian family, planting parsley in buckets on a rooftop, hoping for herbs and perhaps a moment that feels normal. Below, A boy draws tanks on the walls, one labelled ours, one labelled theirs, both with frowny faces. Every few years, like clockwork gone cruel, a new conflict ignites. In 2008, Operation Cast Lead, then Pillar of Defence, then Protective Edge. Each war has a name, each name tries to sound strategic, and each ends in broken buildings and buried children. You crouch beside a crater the size of a school bus. A tea kettle rests beside it covered in ash. The house that owned it is gone, but its story lingers in the metal's warbled shape. Historians still argue whether the cycle of violence is provoked or inevitable, whether deterrence or desperation drives each side. You nod, knowing it's probably both. Hamas fires rockets. Some land in open fields. Some hit schools, homes, or buses. Israel responds with airstrikes, artillery, and sometimes ground invasions. One side cites self-defense, the other, occupation. Both dig deeper into their positions, like feet into trench mud. In Israel, the Iron Dome intercepts rockets with surreal precision. People in Tel Aviv check an app for incoming sirens. You sip coffee in a kitchen with reinforced walls and no windows. The clock ticks. The siren wails. Everyone moves with well-rehearsed calm toward a safe room. Meanwhile, in Gaza, there are no safe rooms. Some sleep in stairwells, others under desks. You sit on the tiled floor of a school, converted into a shelter. The generator coughs. A toddler sucks their thumb, oblivious to the war but attuned to its rhythms. The human cost is staggering. Thousands dead, many of them civilians. UN reports stack higher than sandbags. Reconstruction begins, then halts. Foreign aid trickles in, held up by bureaucracy, politics, or suspicion. Still hope flickers. Artists paint murals on bombed walls. A park opens complete with plastic flamingos. A girl writes a poem titled, "My Kite Doesn't Know Borders." Her teacher nods, fighting back tears or allergies. It's unclear which. You visit the Israeli side next. Towns like Sderot have playgrounds shaped like bomb shelters. Children here grow up with different fears, but not lesser ones. Trauma doesn't check passports. One parent tells you, "I want my kid to know peace exists outside the Torah portion." Just once. Gaza and Israel are physically close, some points only a few kilometers apart, but ideologically light years away. Dialogue is rare. Travel is rarer. Even empathy feels like a luxury. Scholars debate whether the blockade is a necessity or a form of collective punishment, whether Hamas governs or merely controls, whether peace requires the fall of walls or the changing of hearts. You think it's both, and more. International responses oscillate. Some support Israel unequivocally, others condemn it fiercely. Still others wring their hands, issue statements, and fund peace workshops that no one attends. You flip through a brochure titled "Conflict Resolution Through Sand Art." It's earnest, it's ignored. UN agencies try to fill the gaps. Schools, food programs, counseling. But budgets shrink, mandates blur. Every solution feels temporary, like tape on a cracking dam. And in the middle, ordinary people. Mothers just trying to find baby formula. Fathers repairing bicycles with string and willpower. Kids collecting shrapnel like marbles. Everyone trying to live between explosions. A man in Gaza tells you, "We are not victims, we are survivors." Then he gestures to his demolished apartment and says, "But sometimes even survivors need a break." At a checkpoint, you wait behind a farmer holding strawberries. He's hoping to export them. Israel allows some goods out selectively. His strawberries are beautiful, juicy red, hopeful. They will likely rot before they're approved. Somewhere nearby, a tunnel is being dug. These underground paths connect Gaza to Egypt and occasionally Israel. Some are for smuggling food, others for arms. They are lifelines and liabilities. You peer into the darkness and wonder what desperation looks like in cubic meters. Then, there's the Great March of Return protests of 2018. Weekly marches along the border fence filled with flags, chants, and sometimes fire. Israeli snipers fire live rounds. Dozens die. Hundreds are wounded. You count more wheelchairs at a Gaza rehab clinic than chairs with wheels should ever be. But ask anyone why they march, and they'll say, to be seen, to be heard, to go home. You reach for sleep, but history taps your shoulder again. Because this isn't about a single war. It's about 15 years of blockade of rocket fire of fears that your morning routine could be your last. Still, someone waters a jasmine plant. Still, a muezzin calls the faithful to prayer. Still, families laugh at wedding videos on cracked smartphones. And still the question floats in the night, how much longer can two peoples occupy the same grief? Caliphs' conquests and cultural bloom. You float into the early Islamic centuries, where cities thrive and new powers take hold. You drift into the ancient corridors of the mind, to a time when Egypt's shadow stretched far over both Gaza and Israel. Pharaohs marched north, not for pyramids, but for ports. Access to the Mediterranean was the real gold. The strip of land you now stroll upon has always been the world's narrowest, most important hallway. Centuries pass in sand-swept blinks. After the Assyrians and Babylonians enter the Persians, and then Alexander's Greeks, you sip water from a clay jar while imagining a world where Greek amphorae and Hebrew scrolls shared shelf space. Spoiler, they didn't get along well, but they did both leave graffiti in places like Ashkelon. Then came the Romans, organized, armored, and annoyingly persistent. They built roads, aqueducts, and resentment. Jerusalem boiled under their rule. The Jewish revolts followed, ending with the temple destroyed, and a diaspora that still echoes in dinner table debates around the world. You step through the smoky veil of time and land in the early centuries of Islam. The Rashidun Caliphate seizes control of Palestine swiftly after Muhammad's death. The region becomes a prized jewel in the early Islamic empires. Mosques rise, Arabic spreads, and Gaza is for a brief moment a hub of Islamic scholarship. That's right, Gaza had intellectual street cred long before modern headlines painted it in grayscale. You hear debates echoing from stone walls, scholars discussing law, merchants arguing over pepper prices, poets comparing metaphors involving camels. It's surprisingly lively. But then the Crusaders arrive. Oh yes, the Crusades. Europeans with crosses on their tunics and very little Middle Eastern cultural sensitivity. They take Jerusalem, then lose it, then take it again. It's like historical ping pong, except every volley involves swords and betrayal. One medieval chronicler described Gaza as a passage of armies and a graveyard of ambitions. He wasn't wrong. The city changed hands so many times it probably had a rotating welcome sign. The Mamluks tried stabilizing things with their own brand of architectural flair and bureaucratic precision. Then the Ottomans showed up in the early 1500s, bringing long centuries of relatively consistent rule. You imagine sipping Turkish coffee on a rooftop in Jaffa, the call to prayer echoing gently across orange groves. For once, the chaos recedes. But don't relax just yet. Empires love dissolving when you're finally comfy. After World War I, the Ottomans fall and the British arrive, carrying maps they drew with straight lines and very little regard for actual humans. The British Mandate of Palestine begins in 1920 and sets the stage for, well, just about every awkward conversation at your uncle's dinner table. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 had already promised a national home for the Jewish people, which was noble, vague, and incredibly combustible. Jewish immigration from Europe, especially after the Holocaust, surged. Tensions with Arab populations who, spoiler alert, already lived there, exploded. By 1947, the UN proposed a two-state plan, one for Jews, one for Arabs, with Jerusalem internationalized. Jews accepted it, Arabs didn't. War followed in 1948 as 5 Arab nations invaded the newborn state of Israel. Israel survived. Gaza came under Egyptian control, and the West Bank fell to Jordan. The Palestinian state proposed in the UN plan, never born. You sit beside a well in an abandoned village, one of over 400 Palestinian towns emptied during that war. Some people fled, others were forced out. Historians still argue whether it was ethnic cleansing or the fog of war. What's not debated, the birth of the Palestinian refugee crisis. By 1967, another war flips the chessboard. Israel takes Gaza from Egypt, the West Bank from Jordan, and East Jerusalem. It's like watching someone sweep the pieces off the board and pocket them all. The territories are occupied, and that term becomes the most emotionally charged word in Middle Eastern vocabularies. Israel begins building settlements in these areas, outposts that grow into towns, often with guard towers and Hebrew-only roads. Palestinians watch from across fences, anger mounting like summer heat on concrete. And somewhere in this tangled history, Gaza becomes a paradox, a tiny strip that feels vast in its complexity. It's not just about land, it's about memory identity, and who gets to write the ending to a story everyone claims as theirs. You picture a family in Hebron showing you the key to a house in Jaffa they haven't seen in 3 generations. Then a Jewish man in Ashdod points to old photos of his grandfather in Baghdad, forced to flee. Both stories end with, "We had to leave." And the region absorbs these stories like cracked soil soaks, rain eagerly, unevenly, and always too little too late. The scholarly consensus, there isn't one. Was partition inevitable? Could peace have worked in 1948? Should Britain have left sooner or stayed longer? You shrug and eat another fig. The past doesn't yield easy answers, only layered ones. You walk past olive groves now fenced off for security zones, past checkpoints where teenagers with rifles wave you through or stop you for hours. You see the irony of ancient lands patrolled by kids still studying for final exams. And through it all, Jerusalem glows on the horizon. Always Jerusalem. A city too sacred for its own safety. You can hear it breathe heavy with centuries of whispered prayers and shouted claims. You lie down beneath the stars and even they seem divided. Some aligned with one side, others with another. But above them all, one truth persists. This land remembers. Every footstep, every battle, every prayer etched into soil like scripture. It doesn't forget. It just waits for someone to finally listen. Crusaders and the counter-crusade. Foreign knights arrive, get cozy, and then very much uninvited. The wind picks up again this time, carrying echoes of the 1980s, a decade where the world started watching Gaza more closely, not through a telescope, but through the evening news. You find yourself standing in a narrow alley of a refugee camp laundry, flapping above like soft banners in a silent protest. A young boy kicks a soccer ball made of rags. An old woman peers out behind a lace curtain, her eyes telling more stories than any textbook ever dared. In 1987, the First Intifada begins Arabic for shaking off. That's exactly what it is, a generation of Palestinians shaking off fear, frustration, and the suffocating weight of occupation. But this isn't a grand military campaign. It's tire burnings, rock throwings, strikes and graffiti. It's homemade flags stitched together from scraps and dreams. You can almost hear the spray paint hiss as slogans fill the walls. Historians still argue whether this uprising was spontaneous or planned, but the mood was clear this wasn't going away. Israel, caught off guard, responded with force. Images of kids with slingshots facing tanks began flooding Western TV sets. Suddenly, Gaza wasn't just a name on a map, it had faces, stories, heartbreak. The world leaned in. By the early 1990s, after years of clashes, bruised reputations and growing global pressure, both sides hesitantly sat at the table. Enter the Oslo Accords, a peace process you might describe as hopeful, but not waterproof. The iconic photo of Rabin and Arafat shaking hands on the White House lawn that happened. And behind that photo, millions dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, the story could shift. You listen to the cautious optimism in the streets. The Palestinian Authority is formed. There's talk of autonomy. Gaza and Jericho come under partial Palestinian control. Border signs begin to change. Flags fly differently. But then, Hamas enters stage left. Founded in the late 80s during the First Intifada, Hamas is more than a political party. It's a movement with its own military wing, ideological foundations, and zero chill when it comes to compromise. With roots in the Muslim Brotherhood, its charter originally called for the destruction of Israel. Now, whether you think that charter evolved or just got rewritten in nicer calligraphy, it marked a turning point. The Palestinian leadership fractures. Fatah and Hamas start resembling divorced parents at a particularly awkward parent-teacher conference. Gaza becomes the main stage of this custody battle. In 2005, Israel makes a surprise move. It withdraws from Gaza, packs up settlements, removes troops. On paper, it's disengagement. But from the Palestinian side, especially inside Gaza, it doesn't feel like freedom. Israel still controls the borders, the airspace, the sea. It's like being given the keys to your apartment, but the landlord still lives in the hallway. Then comes 2006. Hamas wins the Palestinian legislative elections. Plot twist. Most of the world is stunned, especially the West, which had been cheering for democracy, and then did a double take when democracy voted in folks with rockets. Aid gets frozen. Tensions rise. Fatah and Hamas go from side eyes to full-on street fights. By 2007, Hamas controls Gaza entirely. Now Gaza is cut off, not just from Israel, but often from its own political siblings. You imagine a teenager in Gaza City staring across the border fence toward the West Bank, knowing they're part of the same people and yet separated by ideology checkpoints and an ever-widening political chasm. You pause to reflect on the blockade. Since 2007, Israel, and to a lesser extent Egypt, impose a siege on Gaza, restricting the movement of goods people, even medical supplies. Israel argues it's to prevent weapons smuggling. Critics call it collective punishment. Both sides have bullet points. The result? A crumbling infrastructure, rising unemployment, and a generation growing up surrounded by walls they didn't build. And yet life goes on. You walk through a Gaza market where fishmongers still shout over crates of sardines. Kids still chase soccer balls. Women still hang out laundry joke about their husbands and gossip about whose son might get engaged next. Resilience. It turns out is louder than despair, but underneath tension coils like a spring, because every few years it explodes. A kidnapping, a rocket, a raid, a retaliation. Operation Cast Lead, Operation Pillar of Defense, Protective Edge, Guardian of the Walls. The names keep changing, the pattern doesn't. You look up to see drones tracing invisible lines across the sky. You duck instinctively, not because of danger, but because in this land, the skies remember too. Historians still argue whether any of these military operations bring lasting security or just feed the cycle. Some say Gaza is ungovernable. Others say it's been denied the chance to govern itself. Either way, the civilian toll always makes the headlines. Rubble, grief, statements, silence. And through it all, the question echoes: what is Gaza really? An open-air prison, a fortress of resistance, a battered homeland, a political pawn. Maybe all of them, maybe none. Maybe just a place where people want to raise their kids without sirens. You close your eyes beside a crumbling wall, and the voices blend Hebrew lullabies, Arabic prayers, UN officials muttering into microphones. No answers arrive, but understanding creeps in like morning light. Here, history isn't written. It's relived, again and again and again. Ottomans and centuries of stillness. The region slumbers under imperial rule, but lines and loyalties still shift. You find yourself wandering Gaza's narrow streets once more, but this time in the late 2010s, where hope and exhaustion blur together in the dusty afternoon heat. Concrete buildings wear their scars openly, shrapnel wounds, broken windows and graffiti that reads more like pleas than slogans. A teenager hunches over a dusty laptop powered by a generator. Just beyond him, a family gathers tea around a chipped ceramic pot. Daily life insists on continuing no matter how many times the sky has cracked open above them. From 2014 onward, Gaza's cycles of conflict grow more compressed, like a rubber band pulled tighter with each snap. The border fence becomes not just a symbol, but a pressure valve. In 2018, the Great March of Return begins. Every Friday, thousands gather near the fence, some peaceful, others angry. They wave Palestinian flags, burn tires, and demand the right of return for refugees displaced in 1948. You picture the dust rising like incense as chants swell and kites with flaming tails drift across the horizon. Israel responds with snipers and tear gas. The death toll rises, so do international headlines. Historians still argue whether this movement was grassroots expression or politically orchestrated, but either way, the result is blood-soaked banners and funerals on repeat. A young boy with a slingshot becomes an icon. A medic in a white coat becomes a martyr. The world watches, frowns and scrolls. And amid it all, Gaza's daily rhythms keep spinning. A woman picks mint from a rooftop garden. A school teacher carries textbooks past a crater in the road. A groom dances at his wedding under fairy lights powered by a car battery. Meanwhile, the political theatre intensifies. The Trump administration moves the US Embassy to Jerusalem in 2018, setting off another wave of outrage. To Israelis, it's a long overdue recognition. To Palestinians, it feels like being erased again. In Gaza, protests flare up and airstrikes follow. By 2021, another full-scale conflict ignites. It starts as it often does with tension in Jerusalem, evictions in Sheikh Jarrah, clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque, but the ripple spreads fast. Rockets fly from Gaza, sirens blare in Israeli cities. Social media lights up with hashtags horror and heartbreak. You sit beside a crumbling balcony and watch the fire trails streak across the night sky like angry stars. Below, families huddle in stairwells or under staircases. On both sides of the wall, children press tiny fingers into their ears. Parents whisper reassurances they no longer believe themselves. The death toll climbs again. Apartment blocks fall. And then, as always, a ceasefire comes. Temporary, brittle, like glass laid over a minefield. It's in these lulls that Gaza feels most surreal. Streets get swept. Markets reopen. Kids go back to schools, many of which were used as shelters days earlier. Aid trucks roll in. Reporters leave. And a kind of uneasy normalcy settles like a fog. But things are changing. Gaza's youth, over 65% of the population, is restless. They know more about TikTok trends than borders. They dream not of war, but of Wi-Fi work and travel. They learn coding in bombed-out schools. Some even win global robotics prizes, yes, really. A girl named Amal builds a solar-powered robot from spare parts. Another group launches a YouTube cooking show with a single gas burner and a phone taped to the wall. And yet these moments live side by side with despair. Suicide rates rise. Emigration dreams become dinner-table conversations. Some teens swim toward Israeli waters not to escape, but just to feel something else. Israel, too, is shifting. Political instability defines the era. Prime ministers come and go. Coalitions crumble. Ultra-nationalist parties gain traction. The two-state solution becomes more of a ghost than a policy. Historians still argue whether it was ever truly alive to begin with, or just a well-dressed mirage. Inside Israel, voices grow louder on both ends. Some push for annexation, others call for coexistence, and in between fear fatigue and the hard math of security budgets. And what of Egypt? The Rafah border opens and closes like a blinking eye. Sometimes for aid, sometimes for politics, rarely for people. The blockade continues. Goods are smuggled through tunnels, or they were until the tunnels got flooded, bombed, or collapsed. A boy once earned a college degree in tunnel engineering. No, really. You find yourself in a dimly lit cafe in Gaza City, where young poets sip mint tea and recite lines about freedom, longing, and cats. Someone plays an oud. Someone else sketches a tree they've never seen in real life, an olive tree ancient and unbroken. These are the small resistances, the quiet rebellions. Life not in opposition to war, but in spite of it. On the Israeli side, a group of mothers, Jewish and Arab, walk together weekly demanding peace. They wear white. They sing softly. Some carry signs in both Hebrew and Arabic that read, "We refuse to be enemies." You breathe it in, not resolution, but resilience. Not justice, but gestures. Because here's the quiet truth. Gaza isn't a headline. It's a place. With birthday cakes, old men playing backgammon and mothers brushing hair under flickering lamps. It's imperfect, messy, aching, and entirely human. And like all places, it wants what we all do: dignity, safety, the ability to dream without ducking. You lean back on a worn cushion, the scent of cardamom and sea salt clinging to the air. For now, the night is quiet, but the story you sense is far from over. Mandates, maps, and British misfires. World wars bring new flags, confused promises, and borders drawn with rulers. You blink into the haze of 2023, where the region is somehow louder and quieter at once. News breaks faster than missiles land. A single video clip can ignite outrage before anyone checks the context or the casualty count. You feel the digital static settle on your shoulders like dust hashtags, opinion threads, breaking banners in all caps. But on the ground, the rhythm remains the same. Gaza braces, Israel fortifies, and the cycle stirs again. This time the trigger isn't a rocket or a protest, it's politics. New hardline leaders gain ground in Israel's government. Words like annexation and sovereignty stop being campaign slogans and start appearing in draft bills. Plans emerge to expand settlements in the West Bank. That map you saw back in Section 5, it's getting redrawn again without consent and certainly without clarity. Historians still argue whether this phase is the product of ideology or security, but either way, it fuels the same old fire. In Gaza, militant groups respond with rocket fire, fast and furious. Israel answers with drones and airstrikes. Civilians duck, ceilings crack, and international observers tweet, condemn, and move on. You walk through a neighborhood reduced to rubble, still warm to the touch. A cat paws through concrete dust. A boy salvages school notebooks from under a twisted rebar beam. And above it all, a single white flag flutters from a broken satellite dish, like a prayer tied to the wind. But zoom out and you'll see something else. A rising tension between Gaza's internal factions. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, smaller armed splinters, they don't always get along. Power struggles flare beneath the headlines. You overhear a whispered joke in a Gaza barbershop: even our enemies aren't united. And that's only half the tangle. Inside Israel, political fragmentation deepens. Secular versus religious, right versus further right. Peace advocates find themselves sidelined, shouted down, or simply exhausted. At the same time, military service remains mandatory, and memories of past wars cast long shadows in Israeli households. Every Israeli child knows where the nearest bomb shelter is. Every Gazan child knows what an airstrike sounds like. Amid all this, you notice how the language itself shifts. Words like de-escalation become cliches. Truce means maybe 4 days without explosions. Peace process. A phrase that now lives mostly in archives and academic panels. But something else is happening too. Quiet, stubborn defiance in the form of art, storytelling, and empathy. In Tel Aviv, an Israeli filmmaker releases a short documentary about a Gazan puppeteer. In Rafah, a teenage girl writes poems about sunflowers pushing through cement, and it's not all one-sided. Some Palestinians criticize Hamas openly, carefully, of course. They question leadership, question strategy, question why their futures feel so stuck. One student writes an op-ed called "Dreaming Beyond Survival." It doesn't make the front page, but it circulates anyway. That's how hope tends to travel here, in whispers, not waves. You sip tea with a university professor who once studied in Cairo. He teaches political science now, but half his class has dropped out. Some to fight, some to flee, some just vanished. He shrugs and says, "History teaches us everything and nothing." You remember a phrase from an earlier section: "We refuse to be enemies." It echoes more now. It's printed on a sticker inside a cafe bathroom mirror, right above the sink where a barista washes lipstick off borrowed cups. And then, just when you think you've grown numb, something cracks you open again. Maybe it's the video of a child pulling her little brother from rubble. Maybe it's the grandmother who walks 12 blocks with a basket of bread because her neighbors are sheltering in place. Or maybe it's the way a mosque and a synagogue in different cities both set up soup kitchens during Ramadan and Passover. No headlines. Just hunger met with kindness. The geopolitical players stay complicated. Iran, the US, Egypt, Qatar, the UN, each pulling strings, releasing statements, arranging talks. Historians still argue whether these external actors help stabilize or inflame the situation. The answer depends on the decade and the interpreter. And speaking of interpreters, language is a battlefield too. The word terrorist can depend on who's speaking. Resistance wears different uniforms. Even border means different things to different maps. You begin to wonder if definitions are the real minefields. But here's a quieter truth. Most people on both sides are tired. Not defeated, not resigned, but tired. Tired of grief, of waiting, of explaining, of watching their kids grow up knowing what drone buzzes mean. And still they plant gardens. Still they celebrate weddings. Still they build sandcastles at the beach between ceasefires. Because life in Gaza and Israel is not just trauma. It's not just rubble and sirens. It's laughter over coffee arguments about soccer, long phone calls with cousins abroad. It's little girls in polka dot dresses learning French verbs. It's old men in folding chairs playing chess with bottle caps. And every so often something miraculous happens. A child survives. A building reopens. A truce holds. A story spreads, small, beautiful, defiant. Like a flower pushing through asphalt. You sit again back to the wall and hear the call to prayer rising over the rooftops. In the distance, church bells answer not in harmony, but in coexistence. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, the city exhales. You know it won't last. But in this place, even fleeting peace is worth its weight in gold. Birth of Israel. Loss of Palestine. Independence for some, exile for others. And a conflict that won't nap. You turn your gaze toward Gaza itself, now this tiny strip of land barely the size of Las Vegas, wedged between Israel, Egypt, and the Mediterranean Sea. The name alone conjures headlines, images of smoke and ruin, but you step past the smoke to see what lies underneath. Streets hum with mopeds, fruit vendors, and the resilient chatter of people simply trying to live. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth, and you feel it tight alleyways, high-rises built from ambition and rebar neighbors talking through windows just meters apart. There's a rhythm to it, a heartbeat that persists through blockade, blackouts and bombardment. And yes, there's the blockade. Israel controls most of Gaza's airspace, coastline and border crossings. Egypt guards the south. Every item entering Gaza is inspected, tracked, approved or denied. Historians still argue whether the blockade is a necessary security measure or a form of collective punishment, but whatever it is, it shapes daily life like gravity. You wait in line at a checkpoint, sun hot on your neck. It's not even for travel, just for flour. Inside the grocery store, shelves are part full and part rumor. Someone heard toothpaste might come in next week. Someone else hoards candles for the next power outage. You overhear a mother explaining to her child that the flickering lights are not ghosts, just the grid failing again. But Gaza isn't only a cage, it's also a forge. Art, music, science, they bloom in impossible soil. You visit a classroom where students build drones out of scrap electronics. You sit in on a workshop where poets translate Emily Dickinson into Arabic. And across a battered rooftop, a young man paints murals of birds flying out of prison bars. Even the sea isn't just a border, it's a horizon. Fishermen still cast their nets dodging Israeli naval patrols that sometimes fire warning shots or worse. One morning you help haul in a net and find it tangled with plastic bottles and a single octopus. It's not enough to feed a family, but it's something. In Gaza, something is often enough to keep going. Still, the price is steep. Gaza's youth unemployment rate hovers near 70%. Marriages are delayed, emigration dreams multiply. And yet weddings still happen. Hope doesn't need permission. You sit with a tailor who once made suits for a luxury hotel in Jaffa. Now he sews school uniforms by candlelight. He shows you a faded photo of his shop before a missile strike turned it to cinders. He smiles, shrugs, and says, "We stitch what we can." And all around you, the children. Playing soccer with a punctured ball, skipping rope between ruins, drawing their dreams in chalk on broken sidewalks. One girl draws a house with a sun, a cat, and a tree. You ask if it's her home. She says it's the next one. This one's too loud. Outside observers often treat Gaza as a footnote to Israel-Palestine, or as a problem to solve, or as a talking point. But you sit with a teacher who says softly, "We are not a problem. We are people." That should be enough. In Israel, the view is different, but the fear is real. Cities like Ashkelon and Sderot lie just a few kilometers from Gaza's border within rocket range. When alarms blare, families have 15 seconds to reach shelter. Children know the drill by heart: run, don't scream, keep your head down. Some kindergartens are reinforced bunkers. The trauma seeps in like water through old stone. You talk to an Israeli mother who says she wants peace more than anything, but she won't risk her child's life for it. Her cousin died in a bus bombing during the Second Intifada. Her nephew fought in the 2014 Gaza war. We build walls because we're scared, she says. But then we forget who's on the other side. And the other side is scared too. You meet a Gazan mother who fears that her child might never see the outside world. Not Paris, not even Ramallah. We don't teach hate, she says. We teach waiting. You begin to realize that beneath the policies and headlines and geopolitics, it's not just about ideology. It's about stories. Who gets to tell theirs and who listens? And in Gaza, stories are currency. A boy tells you his dream of becoming a chef. He's never tasted chocolate. At a seaside cafe, power flickers again. A generator rumbles to life. The coffee arrives late, but still warm. A man at the next table reads aloud from a book of Mahmoud Darwish poems, his voice soft as the waves beyond the sandbags. The waiter hums along. Not the poem, but something older. A lullaby, maybe. And for a moment it's quiet. No drones, no sirens. Just life, briefly unbothered. But of course you know what comes next. Gaza is often the matchstick in a rain-soaked box, hard to ignite. But once lit, flames spread fast. Whether it's a border protest, a military raid, or a misstep in negotiations, escalation feels inevitable. And every round of violence deepens the trench of memory, widens the wound, shortens the fuse. Yet somehow people keep living here, not surviving living, finding sweetness in burnt sugar tea, laughing at old sitcoms dubbed into Arabic, posting sunset photos with hashtags like "still here" and "life goes on." Because life does go on, even in Gaza, even when everything else says it shouldn't. Wars, walls, and the never-ending talks. Decades of skirmishes, ceasefires, checkpoints, and handshakes that don't last. You step cautiously into the realm of political chess, the landscape of modern diplomacy between Israel, Hamas, and the fragmented leadership of the Palestinian territories. It's a place where handshakes last seconds, but grudges last decades, and nearly every conversation circles back to the same word: recognition. On paper, Gaza is governed by Hamas, a group that many in the West label as a terrorist organization, while others in the region see it as a resistance movement. You sit through a smoky late-night discussion in a Gaza apartment where opinions flip depending on who's in the room. For some, Hamas brought order where chaos reigned. For others, it brought only another kind of cage, this one, with stricter rules and fewer exits. Over in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority tries to maintain its own form of control, though its influence in Gaza is about as effective as trying to herd cats through a thunderstorm. Historians still argue whether the Hamas-Fatah split in 2007 was the final nail in the coffin of Palestinian unity, or simply another chapter in a long dysfunctional family drama. You visit a university where students debate fiercely under portraits of Arafat and faded flags. One girl says, "We're taught to hate the occupation, but no one teaches us what to do after it's gone." Another says, "We can't even agree on lunch, let alone liberation." Then you cross the wire. On the Israeli side, politics are just as tangled, only in Hebrew and with more press conferences. Israel's political scene spins faster than a carousel run by caffeine-addled squirrels. Coalitions form and dissolve like sandcastles, and each new prime minister inherits the same unsolvable puzzle, just with slightly rearranged pieces. You find yourself in a Tel Aviv cafe, where middle-aged men argue over espresso about whether Gaza should be rebuilt or reduced. One wears a Peace Now button, the other says that's cute. I used to wear one too before my cousin was killed. And suddenly, the conversation cools because pain trumps principle. Every time. Security remains the heartbeat of Israeli politics, and Gaza is the bruise that won't fade. Every rocket fired from Gaza becomes another talking point on TV, another campaign slogan. No peace without safety, one billboard proclaims. No safety without separation, says another. At a military base near the border, soldiers half your age stare at screens showing blurry drone footage of rooftops and alleyways. One says, "I hate this job." Another replies, "We all do. But rockets don't ask how we feel." Even when ceasefires are brokered by Egypt, Qatar, the UN, or a guy with a decent Wi-Fi signal, it's often just a pause, a political coffee break before the next round. No one really believes it's peace, more like intermission. You meet a journalist in Jerusalem who says, "We recycle headlines here. I can just change the date and maybe a few names." You ask how they stay hopeful. They shrug. Hope's overrated, but good hummus helps. Internationally, Gaza is the elephant in the diplomatic room. Governments tiptoe around, it issues statements like deep concern and calls for restraint and then move on. The United Nations votes, the votes are vetoed, and the wheel keeps turning. The United States plays both referee and sponsor depending on the day. And Europe, well, Europe writes letters. One afternoon you watch a live feed of the UN Security Council. They're debating Gaza again, and the translator sounds sleepy. The Russian delegate sighs. The American raises her eyebrow. The Palestinian representative tells a story about his grandmother's olive tree. The Israeli speaks of a child killed by shrapnel. You realize these are all true, and they all hurt. But the system isn't built for healing. It's built for maintaining balance, however fragile. Like a scale made of cobwebs and borrowed time. Even humanitarian aid gets caught in the gears. Convoys of food and medicine get delayed by border checks, paperwork, or political whims. A crate of insulin can take longer to cross than a scandal takes to trend on Twitter. And somehow, the people in need always wait the longest. Still, not everyone has given up. You meet an aid worker in Rafah who's been crossing the border since the 90s. He says every year it gets harder. Every year I come back. You ask why. He points to a child clutching a notebook. Because she's still learning. And then there are the peace initiatives, the grassroots efforts, the joint tech startups between Israelis and Palestinians, the shared art exhibits, the stubborn dreamers who believe borders are just lines we haven't finished erasing. You sit in on a Zoom call where a rabbi, an imam, and a secular teacher discuss school programs for mutual understanding. It sounds like the start of a joke, but it's real and beautiful, but fragile. Always fragile. You remember something an old man in Gaza told you. Peace is like bread. Easy to eat, hard to bake. And he's right. Everyone wants peace. No one agrees on the recipe. So the region waits stuck between outrage and exhaustion, trapped in a cycle that feels ancient, yet somehow freshly absurd. Both sides carry the scars of history like family heirlooms. And both are haunted, not just by what's happened, but by what might never happen. But even here, in the most hardened corners of conflict, you spot tenderness. A soldier helping an injured Palestinian boy. A Gazan family lighting candles and singing through the shelling. A mural painted on a blast wall, two hands reaching across barbed wire. Because politics may play rough, but people somehow still reach for one another. Still cook, still dance, still argue over soccer teams. And in a region where the land remembers every footprint, even the smallest kindness leaves a mark. Still sacred, still split. You drift through a land where every stone has a side and peace feels just out of reach. The night has deepened now, and you've traveled far through dusty scrolls and fresh headlines, through heartbreak and habit. But before you drift off, there's one last piece to fit in this 1,000-year puzzle, why the tension persists, despite every speech treaty or well-meaning olive branch. It's not just politics. It's narrative. You sit at a quiet rooftop in Jerusalem, where the call to prayer mingles with church bells and the clink of wine glasses from a nearby cafe. Below you, the old city lies like a storybook whose pages have been dog-eared by a dozen empires. Everyone tells their version. Everyone thinks theirs is the original print. Israel, for many, is a rebirth, a return to ancestral soil hard-won after the trauma of the Holocaust. For many Palestinians, it's the wound that never closed. Al-Nakba. The catastrophe lives on not just in textbooks, but in the silences between generations. A grandmother pauses when you ask about her childhood. A teenage boy born in a refugee camp still holds the key to a house his family fled in 1948. And that's the heart of it. Both sides carry stories too painful to put down. Historians still debate whether peace processes fail because of borders or because of memory. But every negotiation eventually slams into identity, into dignity, into loss. Even names are loaded. East Jerusalem or Al-Quds security fence or apartheid wall, Judea and Samaria. Or the West Bank, language becomes land and land becomes legacy. You wander through Hebron, where Israeli settlers and Palestinian residents live in uneasy proximity. On one street, children wave Israeli flags. On another, they paint Palestinian ones on stones. Between them, a soldier leans against a wall, eyes scanning both sides. And somewhere overhead, a drone hums. In some places, they build parallel schools. Not just separate classrooms, entire curriculums that never overlap. One history lesson teaches heroism, the other teaches displacement, and both are true depending on where you're born. You visit a museum where a dusty exhibit describes a village erased after 1948. The guide calls it necessary. You ask him what happened to the people. He shrugs. They left. You meet a woman whose family once lived there. She says, "We were pushed." The truth is a tug of war, and memory is the rope. Still, there are moments that whisper a different story. A Jewish and Arab choir rehearses in a rented hall. Their harmony stumbles over lyrics, but not for long. A peace activist hands out fig saplings along a demolished fence line. A professor Israeli tells you over coffee. It's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. And yet the ground keeps shaking. Gaza flares. The West Bank burns the headlines, refresh. A new ceasefire. A new funeral. A new round of blame. International leaders say, now is the time for calm. Locals roll their eyes. Calm never lasts. The pain is cyclical, like seasons only without the flowers. A stabbing here, a raid there, a bus bombing remembered, a boy shot while throwing stones. And each side asks the same question. Why do they hate us? But it's not always hate. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's weariness. Often it's simply inherited trauma, passed down like a family name. You meet a teenage girl who says, "I just want to swim in the sea. But I don't think I'll ever leave the checkpoint." In this region, checkpoints are physical, but also emotional. You learn early where you can go, what you can say, who you can love. A Jewish man falls for a Palestinian woman. Their parents don't speak for months. When asked why, they both say it's complicated. And it is, but not always. Sometimes it's simple. You walk into a bakery in Jaffa where the Jewish and Arab owners share coffee over warm kanafe. You ask how they make it work. They laugh. "We both like sugar," one says, "and we both hate Mondays." And there it is, humanity stubborn as a cactus in the desert. You visit a hilltop overlooking Ramallah. In the distance, the lights of Tel Aviv shimmer like stars spilled sideways. Between you and them lies a wall, a literal towering wall. But the wind doesn't care. It crosses freely, brushing against both cities without checking ID. You ask yourself, will there ever be peace? Maybe. Maybe not in the grand Nobel Prize sort of way. But maybe in moments, a shared laugh, a book, traded a meal split under curfew. Peace isn't always a treaty. Sometimes it's a tiny decision not to hate. And maybe that's enough for now. Because the conflict between Israel and Gaza isn't just about rockets and retaliation. It's about memory, identity, the ache of belonging. It's about two peoples with centuries of pain and not enough room to hold it all. And yet somehow they keep living, building, singing, resisting. On both sides. And you lie back now, the desert winds fading into a hush. You've traveled thousands of years tonight past kingdoms and crusades, through exiles and elections, across borders and barricades. And here at the end, the truth is this. It's complicated, but not hopeless. The night wraps around you like a soft shawl. Your mind is still walking those ancient streets, but your body knows it's time to rest. You breathe a little slower, you blink a little longer, and the world quiets. Maybe you're still thinking of that old man in Gaza mending shoes by candlelight, or the olive trees that grow in both Hebrew and Arabic. Maybe you remember the hush in the Jerusalem alleyway, where prayers from 3 religions drift into the stars. Let those images fade now, like ink softening on parchment. The stories will still be there tomorrow. The debates, the hopes, the sorrow. But for tonight, you can let them go. Outside your window, a breeze might stir. Somewhere, someone is lighting a lantern. Somewhere else, a child is dreaming of flying over walls. And you are safe. You are still. You are part of a much bigger story, one that bends toward light, even when the path is dark. So let your breath slow. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands rest gently on your chest, feeling the rhythm of a heart that dares to care. Tonight, you've journeyed across deserts and dynasties, but now you return to warmth, to quiet, to sleep. Close your eyes. The world can wait.